So moving over to the defense, as you might expect, there is a new coach leading the way for the Wolfpack defense. And that's Kane Oone. He comes to Nevada from Boise State, where he's most recently served as the co-defensive coordinator and the safeties coach. What style of defense can we expect to see from the Wolfpack here in 2024?
Yeah, I think they want an aggressive defense. I think you're going to see a lot of blitzing. Kane was with Jeff Choate at Montana State. He was his defensive coordinator there. He was a four-time All-American for the Bobcats as well. So he's kind of got those blue-collar roots. But, you look at the personnel, I think the edge positions, not a lot of proven production, but I think there's some pretty good talent there. You look at safety, again, not a lot of proven production, but the transfers, I think – you could see why, they'd be excited about the safeties on this team. I think there are question marks about defensive tackle. I think middle linebacker is this team's strongest position, and I think cornerback's got some questions. So, when you add that all up, I think the run defense is going to be the most questionable aspect of the team because of the lack of proven defensive tackles and truly the lack of numbers there. But I do think on the outside of the defensive line, they could be very talented. So, I think you're going to have to see some blitzing and you're going to have to see some protecting of the box given the defensive tackle situation.
Well, let's move over to that personnel that's going to run Coach Ione's defense. Let's start with the defensive line. That unit took a hit in the transfer portal. They lost guys like James Hansen to Texas Tech, Sasefo Moyaki to Portland State, Deion Washington to Hawaii. However, the portal giveth two. They bring in three transfers. How did that unit look in the spring, and did anyone stand out?
Yeah, I think Henry Ikahihifo is somebody to watch out for. He was a really good prospect as a tight end coming out of high school. Actually played for Nevada for 2 seasons as a tight end, went to a junior college, became a defensive player, then transferred to Cal, didn't play a ton there, then transferred back to Nevada last year. They thought he was going to be eligible. The NCAA said he was a 2-time transfer, said he had to redshirt. So that was really disappointing for him. I think it impacted last year's team. Eligible now for his last season of college. And I think that's a guy who could be a really good player at defensive end. He's moved all over the place. As we mentioned, they kind of made him more of a traditional defensive end last year. Now he's going to be more of like an edge outside linebacker, so he'll get to pass rush a lot more. Another guy to look at, Caden Johnson. He was a 4-star recruit out of high school in Minneapolis. Actually played with Jalen Suggs and Chet Holmgren on AAU basketball teams. Both those guys now stars in the NBA. But he ended up playing for Wisconsin, and they're obviously well known for having great edge rushers. Over the years. He recently transferred to Nevada. He was here for spring camp. So those are 2 guys in particular, I think, are going to be on the field together a lot. And I think they're going to be very productive at defensive end. But I go back to defensive tackle. You mentioned James Hansen. He was a captain of this team last year, starting nose guard. And then Deion Washington, another very talented interior defensive lineman who transferred to Hawaii. So those are their 2 best interior defensive linemen. They've got a guy named Thomas Whitty, walked on, actually out of Alaska. Now a scholarship player. I think he's probably going to be your best interior defensive lineman. But those nose tackles, those defensive tackles are definitely the area where you can look and be like, oh, this is probably the weakest position on the entire team.
Moving over to the linebackers, they look to be in good shape and have some depth this season. They did lose Davion Beckwell to Austin Peay and grabbed Austin Hamatu from Washington. How did the linebackers look in the spring?
Yeah, I think it's a strong position. Drew Watts is, to me, probably the best player on the team. He's a little bit of an undersized middle linebacker, 6 foot, about 230. He's in his 3rd year as a starter now. He's a missile. He goes sideline to sideline. He's really fun to watch. Really emotional player. And then right next to him is a guy named Naki Matialona. He's out of Long Beach Cal Poly, which is a very strong high school program. He's also a 3rd-year starter for this team. He's a senior. So those are 2 really good middle linebackers, probably both a little bit undersized, but they're very athletic. They're very fast. If they can get, that defensive tackle group to keep the offensive line off those 2 guys, they're going to make a lot of plays. So I think that's a position that you can pinpoint and say, oh, this is a really good group. This is a group that can be top 2 or 3 in the Mountain West. They've got experience. They're 3-year starters. They've been really productive. So that is a position that they were able to retain their top players, and they got to be really happy about that.
The defensive backfield had some key losses to graduation in Amini Johnson and Jaden Dedman. In fact, Johnson was the team's leading tackler a year ago. They also lost their second leading tackler from 2023 and Richard Toney Jr. to TCU. But the Wolfpack brought back a nice core group of guys like Kane Savage, KK Mayer, Michael Coates Jr., and Aiden Siwole. Is that how you say that?
Yeah.
All right, we're knocking it.
Yeah, there we go.
Siwole?
Yeah, it's an interesting group. I mean, they do lose their top 3 tacklers. As you mentioned, Amani Johnson, he's now with the Cowboys, undrafted free agent deal. Richard Tony Jr. had a couple of pick sixes. He's now with TCU. That's where Ken Wilson actually ended up landing as a linebackers coach. So, they lose some talent, but I think they've brought in some talent as well. Keaton Crawford is a transfer from Texas. He was one of the best special teams player in the nation last year. He actually had an interception in the Big 12 championship game. He had an East-West Shrine Bowl invitation, but that was primarily as a special teams player. He wants to prove that he can be a 3-down safety. Didn't get to do that at Texas, so came with Jeff Choate to Nevada. I think he has a potential to be one of the better safeties in the Mountain West with his second senior season. Keyshawn Cobb, he's a transfer from West Virginia. Nevada had like 4 or 5 transfers from West Virginia this last year. He's a guy who's been really productive at the FBS level, albeit at Buffalo. Didn't play very much at West Virginia because of injuries. So those guys are probably going to be your starting safeties. Aiden Sueli as well, probably going to be on the field as a starter. He can, play a couple different safety positions. So, among those 3, I think your safeties are pretty decent. KK Meyer played a lot as a redshirt freshman last year. He's going to be a starting cornerback, and then a competition for the other starting cornerback job. So, not a lot of productivity in terms of proven players in the secondary, but I do think there's a decent amount of talent there, and I think that group should end up being pretty solid.
If you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who would that be?
It's Keaton Crawford. He's a transfer from Texas. He's was an elite special teams player for the Longhorns, but didn't really get much of an opportunity to play on the defensive side of the ball. And that's why he transferred to Nevada with Jeff Choate. I mean, he's a guy who, believes in the system, knows the system, and wants to prove he can be an NFL player in terms of being a defender. I think, he's kind of proven he could be an NFL player as a special teamer, a core 4 kind of guy, but he wants to play safety at the next level. So, not a lot of people nationally know about Keaton Crawford, but I think that's a guy who could be an all-Mountain West player at the end of the year.
All right. If you are watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you are listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until next time, we are the G5 Hive.
I-D-I